Okay, before we continue on with the spring of 1969 and investigate all the great music that came out, a couple of notes about last week's episode. Now, some of you may have noticed something that was going on in the background behind me, and I thought I'd let you in on a little bit of the technique of what's going on. You see, I'm actually shooting this in front of a green screen. That way I can put anything that I want behind me, any image that I want. But now, when you use a green screen, it looks like this. It's basically a green screen, which is now hung in front of my record collection. Now, the key with a green screen, pardon the pun, is that when you put a picture behind that on the green screen, you are keying it. And the secret is the lighting is critical. The light across the green screen itself needs to be pretty flat, and there can't be any shadows on the green screen itself. Now, if you look at last week's episode, and if you notice kind of like right behind me over here, there was a shadow. And as a result, some of the images when they were keying would tear up a little bit. Now, on a normal set, when that happens, you yell at and or fire the lighting director and the director of photography. But since this is a cheapo one-man production, if I was going to do that, then there'd be no talent. So no, that didn't happen. But what I have done is spent more time with this episode in moving the lighting and moving where I'm seated so that the shadow's not behind. So hopefully everything will be okay in this episode. I was a little lifting the curtain to take a peek behind, a little behind the scenes to see what's going on. In the meantime, let's rejoin the episode, which is already in progress. As I was saying, 1969 was a great year for a lot of great music that came out. And in the last episode, we looked at just the first 3 months of the year, the winter months. So now it's time to flag down that magical history bus again, jump on it, and move into the spring months. And we'll see the records that came out in April, May, and June. If you're ready, roll up and hop on board, and let's drop the needle. As the winter wanes, spring kind of sprungs. And just like I did in the last episode, we're going to talk about a number of albums, but I'm just going to pick my 2 favorite tracks off of each album. So we start in April when Bob Dylan shocks the music world by moving to Nashville and, make no doubt about it, recording a country album. His singing style is totally different, and even the cover of Nashville Skyline shows Bob smiling at the camera, very welcoming. This is a Bob Dylan album like no other. Here are the tracks. It's a great album, and I can pretty much guarantee that the 2 songs that I pick are not necessarily the 2 that you would. But I'm going to go with I Threw It All Away and Lay Lady Lay. And yeah, I know, Tonight I'll Be Staying Here With You is also a great song. But hey, I only get to pick 2. Next up is the second album from Leonard Cohen, Songs from a Room. And this album has an interesting backstory. Leonard started to record it in Los Angeles, and guess who the producer was? David Crosby. Well, Leonard hated the results, so he pulls everything up and moves to Nashville and starts all over again and decides he wants a very stark album. And boy, did he get it. So for my 2, I'm going to go with the first 2 songs on the record. The great Bird on a Wire, which could be my favorite Leonard Cohen song, and then Story of Isaac. Now we're going to cross the pond, go over to the UK, where in swinging London, something is always happening. And this is the album called A Salty Dog, and it's from Procol Harum. And the title song actually features the band with an orchestra, which is something they come back to 3 years later with a live album with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, which is one of my favorite Procol Harum albums. But let's go back to Salty Dog. For my two picks, I'll go with the title of Salty Dog, and then one with the vocal by Robin Trower. It's called Crucifixion Lane. Another UK rocker creates his debut album, and it's Joe Cocker, and the album is With a Little Help from My Friends. No one can deny he has a very distinctive singing style, and man, if you've ever seen him live, which I did a number of times, his stage behavior was even crazier. But the boy could sing. Here are the tracks. The two songs I'm going to pick off of this one are his cover of Feeling All Right. I love the way he covers that. And then also, of course, the big hit, With a Little Help from My Friends. Our next album comes out of LA, and it's a sprawling double album, and it came out actually on my birthday, April 21st. So you'd think, wow, I should really like this record. Well, it kind of depends on the day of the week that I listen to it, and it's still true over the years. Sometimes I like this album a lot, and sometimes I just loathe it. The album is called Uncle Meat, and it's by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Now, in a previous episode where I had my friend Brad Gardner, who was the drummer in our band back in the high school days, The Darkness, rate his top 10 Zappa albums, he just loves this record. You should check out the episode to see what he has to say. This album is Zappa being wildly creative, and basically, you get everything. For my two picks, I'm going to go with Dog Breath and the Year of the Plague. And then for no other reason, it's just amazing to hear the Mothers of Invention play Louie Louie on the organ at the Albert Hall. So I'm going to pick that. I know, pretty safe choices. The next album is another double album. And yeah, in 1969, there were a few of those. And this one, the band, right after they released the album, had to change their name for the next album. This first album is called CTA, for Chicago Transit Authority. But the real Chicago Transit Authority said, after the album was released, you guys can't do that. This is an amazing debut album. The album was produced by James William Guerciero, who I've talked about before. He produced the Buckinghams. And just previous to this album, he had produced the second album to come out by Blood, Sweat, and Tears, the first one without Al Kooper. The album really wasn't a hit when it came out, but because FM radio was just coming on strong, and disc jockeys on FM, including myself, really liked this album, we played the heck out of it. And Terry Kath was an incredible guitar player. For the two songs I'm going to pick, I'm going to go with Beginnings and their cover of I'm a Man. On the 1st of May, Joni Mitchell releases her album Clouds, and she's joined by Stephen Stills, who plays guitar and bass on this album. All songs are written by Joni. Although Both Sides Now is a well-known song, for the two that I'm going to pick from this record, it's going to be Chelsea Morning and Songs to Aging Children Come. The middle of May sees 4 great albums come out, and the first one is the second solo album by Neil Young. This is the first album where he plays with Crazy Horse, and it's called Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, and this is a classic album. Now, for my two picks on this one, I'm going to go with Cinnamon Girl and Cowgirl in the Sand. And I know you're saying, wait, what about Down by the River? Yeah, it's great, but I can only pick 2. 2 days later, May 16th in the UK, Tyrannosaurus Rex releases their third album called Unicorn. And in an earlier episode, I covered Tyrannosaurus Rex in pretty much detail. This is the last album that Mark Bolan and Steve Peregrine Took appear on together. Many people don't really know this album, but you can tell just from the titles that Mark Bolan was having a lot of fun with rhyming words. So the 2 songs I'm going to pick is Cat Black and She Was Born to Be My Unicorn. But London, the very next day, had another surprise coming for us, and it was another double album. And this one was billed as the world's first rock opera. Yes, it's Tommy by The Who. Now, the concept of a rock opera had kind of been played with by Pete and The Who before on a previous album, A Quick One, where they did a Quick Win While He's Away, where they linked some songs together. But for Tommy, Pete puts his heart and soul into writing a definitive rock opera about that deaf, dumb, and blind kid. The album was a huge hit, and the Who toured the world performing it live, and I saw him do it. Pinball Wizard became a huge international hit, and with that amazing guitar riff intro, yeah, it has to be my first pick. And for my second pick, it's got to be the closer, the amazing We're Not Gonna Take It. Just 2 days later, out in Los Angeles, Richie Furay, just fresh from the Buffalo Springfield, releases his first album since the Springfield have broken up. And the album is called Picking Up the Pieces, and the band is called Pogo. But not for long, because the cartoonist who had created the character Pogo threatened to sue them. So they quickly changed the name of the act to Poco. This is one of the first albums to really be considered country rock. And I really liked the album, and Poco was a great band, and I saw them perform live many times. But this album really didn't catch fire for them, and that's a shame. My two, I'm going to go with Picking Up the Pieces. That's a great song. And then, Just in Case It Happens, Yes Indeed. Just a week after Richie releases Picking Up the Pieces, his old bandmate, Stephen Stills, gets together with the ex-Holly Graham Nash and the ex-Bird David Crosby and releases their first debut album called Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Now, basically, Stephen Stills played almost everything on the record. That's how he got the name Captain Many Hands. The album was a huge success and sold over 4 million copies. Now, this is one of the albums that in my collection, yeah, I've got multiple copies of because I essentially wore the early ones out playing this record so much. It's a classic album. I got to pick just 2 songs. I'm going to go with Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, of course, and then Helplessly Hoping. But May ends with the Moody Blues releasing their 4th album, On a Threshold of a Dream, and it is their first #1 album. So for my 2 off of this album, I'll pick Lovely to See You and Have You Heard Part 1, The Voyage, and Have You Heard Part 2. Now I know that's right there. There's 3 songs, so you're saying, hey, you picked 4. But Have You Heard Part 1, The Voyage, and Have You Heard Part 2, The Voyage is really 1 song. So those are my 2 picks. And our first album coming out in June comes from San Francisco, and it's by a band called It's a Beautiful Day. And it's one of the few bands to feature a violin. For my 2 songs, it's got to be the incredible White Bird, and then for my second one, Bombay Calling. The next album is the second album from the late, great guitar wizard, Jeff Beck, and it's called Beckola. And it's credited to Jeff Beck Group, which of course was Jeff on guitar, Nicky Hopkins on piano, Ronnie Wood on bass, Rod Stewart on vocals, and Tony Newman on drums. The band was actually scheduled to play the Woodstock Festival, but by the time fall of 1969 came around, the Jeff Beck Group had broken up. I like All Shook Up and Plinth Water Down the Drain. While we're in the UK, a very odd band releases their 3rd album. The band is the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band, or sometimes called the Bonzo Dog Band, and the album is called Tadpoles. And it's one of my favorites by this group. And actually, if you want to know more about the Bonzos, you can check out an earlier episode where I pretty much covered their career. On a first pass, I would pick Hunting Tigers Out in India, I'm the Urban Spaceman, Mr. Apollo, and Canyons of Your Mind. But that would be cheating, so I will narrow it down to 2. I'm going to pick I'm the Urban Spaceman and Canyons of Your Mind, which every time I hear that absurd guitar solo, it just makes me laugh. You definitely should check that one out. Meanwhile, up in San Francisco, the Grateful Dead released their 3rd album. I'm sure I'm going to butcher this name. It's almost unpronounceable. Oax Moaxuma. This was the first Dead album to use a 16-track recorder, and Jerry Garcia said they basically just threw everything onto the tape. For my 2 favorites, I'll pick St. Stephen and China Cat Sunflower. And staying in the Bay Area, we head over to San Quentin Prison. Johnny Cash releases another live album because he had such a big hit the year before with Live at Fulton Prison. He decides to now do it at San Quentin. And this album is again a big hit for Johnny. For my two, I'm going to go with his hit I Walk the Line, and then I do like the way he covers the Lovin' Spoonful's Darlin' Companion. And as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist so that you can listen to some of the music that I talk about. Fortunately, it's probably not all, because some of these songs are a bit obscure. But I've tried to include as many as I could to give you a feel for what the springtime of 1969 was really about. Now, there'll be a lot more coming as we get into the summer and the fall of 1969. But for now, hop off the bus. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Keep it rocking. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.